basically, what I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit of a different take on medical technology or medical device adoption. What I want to talk to you about really is more about how things operate within a company environment and how we actually interact with our customers or surgeons. And so the title of my talk today is How to Maximize Medical Technology Adoption by Involving the Right People at the Right Time throughout the product development process. So just, Anne went through my background, but what I wanted to kind of emphasize is really I did all my undergraduate and graduate training within Canada and then went off to the States and have been down there for 7 years now, 5 years in a medical device company. And in that time in a medical device company, in the U.S. structure, basically, what we've been able to do is generate several 510K approved devices and go through that process numerous times. So, that process seems to be relatively efficient and has led to a lot of innovation just in my short time there. And prior to me, it's been quite a path for success for this company. So what I wanted to do is really just give you more of just a brief overview of Bard, who we are, what we do, look at the area of business and research focus, walk through a rapid period of innovation and growth for the company and how those early technologies were adopted and proliferated throughout the industry, how surgeons or the customer ultimately is involved within the product development process and what that really looks like, and ultimately how having the customer or the surgeon involved during development, what are the benefits associated with that for ultimately, from a company perspective, from the surgeon perspective, and ultimately for the patient. So Bard, it's actually a relatively older company. It's about a 100-year-old company founded in 1907. And as of today, it's a publicly traded company on New York Stock Exchange with a market cap of $9.3 billion with an annual revenue of $2.8 billion. So, it's came quite a ways in that period of time. There's 12,000 employees worldwide, approximately, and the headquarters is in Murray Hill, New Jersey. But really, a lot of the R&D work happens at the different divisions spread throughout the U.S., and there's all divisions have different areas of specialty, from vascular, urology, oncology, and our division is focused on surgical specialty products or soft tissue reconstruction. So I would say, really, how does this, you mentioned Davol, how does that fit into the mix? Really what it is sometimes these larger companies, what they do is they can acquire smaller companies. So Davol is a subsidiary of Bard, or the surgical specialties division. And what it is actually is it was a rubber company originally, and they made the largest manufacturer of rubber products worldwide. It doesn't sound too glamorous, but what they did at the time was made hot water bottles and catheters, and then they started to interact with more of the medical community and look at the Foley catheter. So they were the first manufacturer of the Foley catheter, partnered with Dr. Foley at the time, and Bard at the time was the largest worldwide distributor of that catheter. So over time, Davol grew and was ultimately acquired by Bard in the 1980s, and ultimately at that point it stimulated growth and it moved into several different areas. So what you can do as a smaller company a lot of times is look at tangential technologies and look at core competencies in certain areas and start to grow that and follow the market. So Davol, which is a subsidiary of Bard, as I mentioned, basically transformed themselves into a worldwide leader in hernia repair because they had a lot of core competency in polymers and polypropylene products and extrusion of those technologies, weaving, knitting, all those type of things. So it's crazy how a company can completely transform itself, but that's what Davol and Bard did in that area. So as of today, Bard is the worldwide leader in hernia, and Davol specifically is the worldwide leader in hernia repair products for soft tissue reconstruction. So that's just kind of a backdrop in a nutshell. Really, like I mentioned, the area of business focus and research focus for us is this whole area of soft tissue reconstruction, or hernia repair. And really what it is, rather simply, is when a weakness develops in, let me see if I can use a pointer. When a weakness develops in the abdominal wall, what you can have is a bulge or a diastasis occur where the intestine or inter-abdominal contents can bulge through the muscle layers and basically create a hernia. Now what the surgeon does, either open or laparoscopically, they can go in and reduce the contents of that hernia, excise the defect, and ultimately set up the patient for a repair. Now, this used to be done in a different way where there was a primary repair and a surgeon would just use a suture and close it up. But nowadays, the standard of care is using synthetic or biologically derived mesh products to achieve that ultimate repair. Another area for us that we're getting into more recently is breast reconstruction. So you kind of think of it more globally as soft tissue reinforcement and reconstruction, and you start to think, okay, these products could possibly use in different areas. And we started moving into biologically derived materials, and what occurred is this area that was being underserviced in which women were having a full mastectomy or partial mastectomy and had to have a silicone expander placed beneath the pectoralis muscle, there was a gap. And that gap was, leading to several significant issues where they would ultimately use a donor site to reflect a latissimus flap or another donor site like tram flap to reconstruct that area. Whereas, using some of these products now, a surgeon can literally, grab a product off the shelf, reinforce that area, and the patient doesn't endure some donor site morbidity, and it can be done as a single-stage procedure as well, where it reduces some subsequent follow-ups. So that just gives you a little idea of kind of where we're coming from. But just to give you an idea of how innovation and adoption can occur, looking back to 1958, right around that time, a lot of surgeons in this area were doing primary hernia repair. So literally, okay, we have a gap in the abdominal wall, we're going to bring it back together, put suture repair, and at that time, you can see on the figure here that about 50% of these patients would come back in about a year, a couple-year time frame with a recurrence. So right back to square one, let's reduce the hernia, let's get it back together. And all along that way, there's always additional chance for complications and infection and that sort of thing. So in 1958, someone named Dr. Usher, he was the first to introduce the concept of maybe we can reinforce this with a scaffold. And at that point, it was kind of a foreign concept, but it actually started to work. And it reinforced the abdominal wall, and surgeons, it started to produce good results and started to reduce the rate of recurrence with limited complications. Going along several years, some of the technology started to catch up with some of the clinical need, and EPTFE, or Teflon, was created. And you can imagine you put a macroporous mesh product intra-abdominally, you don't want the bowel to grow into it and that sort of thing and all the intra-abdominal contents. So that Teflon barrier created a barrier so adhesions didn't develop to it. So once that started to come along, then there was this period of rapid innovation. And in the early 90s, when laparoscopic surgery took hold, then really, it represented quite a time where both the companies and the surgeons were interacting pretty routinely, and in this new space of laparoscopic surgery, it led to a rapid explosion of all these different types of products after that point. So I'm not going to go through these in detail, but this just gives you an idea of, what are the possible things that could happen in this space and what a surgeon might require. For example, all these products were spun off and developed for inguinal hernia repair, which you can, use your imagination. There's several areas where weakness could exist due to congenital or environmental factors, and synthetic ventral repair products, where there's several products that spun off as well for intra-abdominal use. You have to tack these products in, particularly if you're implanting them laparoscopically, because here's a big product, you need to get it through a small trocar that you put in the abdominal wall, and ultimately you have to get it attached. So there's also been quite an expansion of these fixation devices as well. And over time, these have evolved towards really the theme, I think, these days is less is more for the patient. These are some absorbable fixation devices. A lot of the mesh products and that I discussed have absorbable barriers associated with them too. So they provide basically the temporary fixation or temporary function and ultimately go away at the end of the day. And last but not least, coming from 1958, where this was a kind of a brand new concept to where we are today, there's biologically derived materials being generated for implantation into patients. And what do I mean by that? These allografts and xenograft products are cadaveric tissue that can be harvested from the dermis or the skin layer and processed, chemically treated, acellularized, sterilized, and ultimately these products can be implanted into patients and provide temporary wound support or a scaffold where the body can ultimately remodel it over time and the patient is back to where they were before and they don't have this synthetic product in them for their lifetime. So it goes to show that over time you have to kind of keep your eyes open for the technology and when the actual market is ready for it, and particularly surgeons, involving surgeons in the earlier phases allows these technologies to kind of catch hold and really start to enter the market. Now, as I alluded to, surgeon involvement during this process and during the product development process is pretty key. And honestly, there's some different ways to do it where you could literally be in a vacuum developing a technology and then get it to the market and all of a sudden you're not meeting certain needs or the product is definitely not hitting the target at all. So I think early involvement by surgeons is definitely very helpful for us and also ultimately benefits the patient by a better product at the end of the day. So inside it, probably I don't know how everyone, or if everyone has an idea of how medical device product development occurs, but typically, in general, I would say that it's broken up to several phases or phase gate process. And several companies have different iterations of what you see behind me here. But basically, there's a technology development phase, concept phase, feasibility, and development. And what you're doing is basically it's a filter process. You're going from big ideas to filtering it to things that work. You have a front runner, and then now you're going to market. And I would say in the early tech dev phase, and what I'm talking about is having a surgeon literally come into the office, be involved, or the company go to the OR and interact with the surgeon. And I think the primary point of surgeon involvement at this point is to generate those new ideas, particularly around technique or how the products are being used. Secondly, their involvement at this point can make sure that we're working on clinically relevant problems. This is going to be key to ultimate adoption later because there's several technologies we can chase after and that are intellectually curious, but if it's not clinically relevant, at the end of the day, it's kind of useless for everyone involved. The OR interaction, even in the early tech dev phase, I think is critical because getting people from inside the company into the OR, I think there's so many things that can come out of that interaction. It's pretty critical, and ultimately, even just in the process of internal documentation that you need to generate to launch a product, you need to very thoroughly document user needs. Basically, the user needs help drive the whole product development. In the concept phase, the surgeons, they can come back in or we can go to them at conferences or that sort of thing into their office and generate focus groups where you really ask the tough questions. Is this meeting your needs? What is, how does this product feel? What is, what shape, what size, how are you going to fixate it? All these different types of questions help tailor the message and get closer to the ultimate concept. And in this phase, concept selection is pretty critical. You need to help filter the number of options that you ultimately might go to market with. And I think one of the most critical pieces at this point in the process is to have surgeons involved with the initial data generation. Because some of these technologies at this point, we're still learning about them too. We have a couple of prototypes and we're still trying to figure it out. We're doing some pilot studies, animal studies, and having surgeons involved with the initial pilot studies, it helps ultimately determine how, how the product will, the data will be disseminated into the field ultimately. So getting closer to the feasibility phase, the surgeons represent another critical component, because you need to have them come back in, or you go out to them, and you need to validate your design. And what I'm talking about really is setting up cadaver labs, setting up acute animal labs, having the surgeon physically touch your device, put it into the animal or the cadaver model in a clinically relevant scenario, and really validate the design and determine if that design is wise to go to market with, and is it meeting their needs at that point. Also, a very important point in this area is product interactions, because sometimes there's project teams that are very focused on their own technology, and all of a sudden you put it into a validation scenario, and let's just say you have a hernia repair product that needs to be implanted laparoscopically. Then all of a sudden you put it with a tacker, and then all of a sudden the mesh does not work with the tacker, and there's several different, even you can't develop products in silos. You have to determine how they interact with other products, and that's just not your own, other products on the market as well. And I think one of the key pieces here at the feasibility phase is basically having surgeons involved with generating the pivotal data that you'll be using to submit to the FDA, and also ultimately to launch the product with and help disseminate that information and educate users. And last but not least, development. There's additional design validation that occur at this stage, but really the message is more about scientific communication, packaging the message, having those early surgeons who are involved with the development process, making them or having them really construct the message and helping disseminate the message to the field, and helping educate other surgeons, because last thing we want is to have someone basically using a product that's not educated on how to use it. So I think surgeons help a lot in that process. So where does innovation happen, really? Does it happen in the office? Like in the medical device company? Does it happen in the lab? Or does it happen in the OR? I kind of scratch my head on that all day long, because really I think it's a combination of all of these things, because typically in the office environment, very procedural. This is actually our lead scientist here. But I would say basically it's very procedural. We know all the procedures we need to go through to get a product from point A to point B. But at the same time, if you're developing things in silos and you never consult the user, then at the end of the day, you're kind of really missing the mark. At the same time, surgeons, a lot of times, they have a lot of good ideas, but maybe they don't know the process and all the documentation and the rigor that has to go into launching a product. Things like manufacturing, sterilization, all these different pieces. And the lab is also another key component. So I think really the message that I'm trying to disseminate here is that where does innovation happen? I think it happens in all those three places, but I think it really happens when you get someone from their comfort zone and get them into a totally different environment. For example, an engineer in the OR or a surgeon in the medical device company, and then then it really starts to take off. And really, I think the impact on ultimate adoption, when you have all those people discussing things way early, is that it leads to a better product. So better products and rapid adoption. And just in my little small area of the world, I run the preclinical affairs group, and really what that is generating animal models to support product development. And just the surgeon involvement in that area alone has been pretty significant. They have helped us develop clinically relevant models, and this just shows you a porcine model of simulated laparoscopic ventral hernia repair, basically where you're able to perform laparoscopic surgery in a porcine human clinically relevant, or a porcine clinically relevant model. And really, it's almost like doing true human surgery. Secondly, there's open models to, where it's actually an open defect. On the right-hand side there's models that test antimicrobial technologies where, unfortunately that hand is delivering MRSA right into that wound after you've placed a synthetic mesh product in, and ultimately being able to assess how the products fight it off. The surgeons have been very involved with developing those clinically relevant models, selecting the appropriate bugs in this case and inoculum concentrations, and really, I think, have driven a lot of the solid data that has to be generated to really ultimately get these products approved and adopted. And this was one final example of more recently breast reconstruction I mentioned, I alluded to, where a surgeon was directly involved, plastic surgeon, and really allowed us to generate or create a porcine model of breast reconstruction. And you can imagine that you need appropriate test methods and models to evaluate these products. And ultimately, when they're going to be approved by the FDA, you need to show that you have that robust scientific data. And there was not a model like this in the literature. There's a few slightly similar, but not of a reconstructive procedure in which the surgeons are going to be using it in. So these type of models are basically, without the surgeon's direct clinical experience and technique and expertise, these would not be available for product development. So really, to close, the primary benefits associated with this user involvement or surgeon involvement is that really you're confirming that the user needs are going to be addressed in your products, and that's pretty critical. You end up with products that are safer and more effective at the end of the day because you've tested them throughout the process with their clinical judgment on board the whole time. That, in a nutshell, helps maximize the return on investment for those research dollars. And ultimately, you can utilize a lot of that data that's generated and generate a strong podium presence in which surgeons who are, have been involved since day one, they're very passionate about, what they've been able to help the company achieve and ultimately how that's going to benefit patients. And last but not least, that knowledge that they have really helps with the surgeon education piece because training programs can be developed around that technology and help disseminate the message to a wider audience. So really, I think having surgeons directly involved with the product development process at every stage really ultimately will lead to more rapid product adoption. And I know the pendulum is swinging towards more data and assessments to adopt technologies. So the more valid the data is, the more clinical interaction with the early data generation, I think ultimately the more solid the information is going to be when it's being assessed for ultimate decision to adopt the technology. Thank you.